Hi, and thanks for tuning in. I'm doing another video on blocks, and in particular using the XY parameter. This seems to be the most challenging parameter to use, at least for me. I've already drawn my geometry for the window that we'll be working on. Since I'm making yet another video on dynamic blocks and windows, I've decided to throw in a couple other neat tricks I've been using over the years. Making objects plot in true color, and adding simple shadow effects. The latter is really becoming outdated with all the 3D programs that can create dynamic shadows, but it's still useful if you want to make a quick and simple illustration without having to 3D model anything. I've given my window pane a gradient style hatch. I've also overridden the hatch's color so that they'll plot in true color. In this case, blue and white. Notice that my white is set to true color 255, 255, 255. Not white as defined by color 7. That color will print as black unless you've done something unconventional with your CTB file. This true color override trick will work with most CTB files. You could also create the illusion of a sunset reflection in the window by picking oranges and yellows from the true colors. The shadow is just a transparent solid hatch. Before we get into the actual block, I'll just make my Windowpane Symbols their own block. This will make things easier on us later on. I just use Control-Shift-C, that's copy with a base point, and then Control-Shift-V to paste that as a block. Okay, before we get going, I'm going to show you some blocks that I've made using the XY parameter. I don't use window blocks too often actually. I just thought it would be a good example to use in a tutorial. So this block, you'd use it on plan. I use it to show where my joist groups are. I find this to be really convenient compared to what I was doing before, compared to what I've seen other offices do. I can move these around similar to crosshairs. I also used XY parameters for my stirrups. This would be a section of a structural concrete detail. I find this is a huge time saver. Your grips can also match your cover. I find that that cover varies, so I don't have them like that. I just have them on where the corner of my stirrup would be if there's no fillet on it. So with these, I've done something different. I actually have 4 grips. I'm going to show you how to do that, similar to what I have here. So to actually have 4 working grips with it not doing anything wild on you, there's a few things you have to know that I haven't taught in any of the videos on my channel quite yet, so you'll get that in this lesson. Okay, so let's turn this into a block. Okay, so I'm in the block editor. I'm going to put excuse me, I'm going to put the base point parameter right there. Okay, so we've added our XY parameter. So just to make this easy at first, I'm going to set the number of grips all the way down to 1. I'm going to add an action, a stretch. So this is the important part. I'm going to select the action so its properties come up, hopefully. There we go. I can set it to X distance. If I set it to XY distance, it's going to go sideways on us. Okay, so I'm going to make another action, a stretch action. I'm going to select this same parameter, select the same node or point, and now I'm going to select just this middle line. Well, actually, I'm going to select everything just to show you a common mistake that I make, and I think others might be making too. So I've selected everything. I'm going to hit enter. Now I'm going to click on this, change it to an X distance only, and change the distance multiplier to 0.5. Okay, so I'm going to close the block editor. You can also test your block. Actually, we'll do that. That's way more convenient. So I'm going to show you what happens. So as you can see, it's absolutely not scaling like we want. And I'm going to show you why it's doing that. So also notice it's only moving in the X direction. We want that, but we don't want, obviously we don't want this. That wouldn't be too helpful to anyone. Okay, so close test block. So what I did there is when I made this selection set, I selected everything. So it's similar to having a stretch action, pull everything at the same time. Actually, that's not quite a good example. Something like that. The difference is that stretch action is actually moving my rectangle too. So to fix that, I'll right click, action selection set, modify selection set. I'll keep the same crossing window, but then I'll click R, or type R, enter, to remove objects I don't want in this selection set. First, we don't need this horizontal line in this selection set, and this rectangle does not need to be in the selection set. So I'll test that again and see if it's working now. So it does work, and don't worry about where this grip is going right now. We're going to add the Y stretch actions, and that'll make that operate correctly. Okay, I'll close that. Okay, so I'm going to add the next two stretch actions. I'll do that once more. Remember, the important thing, only select the object you actually want to move. Okay, so I added those two, and now I got to make sure they're both Y distance only. This one will be Y distance only, and the distance multiplier will be 0.5. So remember the most important things here. Make sure these are set to either X distance or Y distance respective to what you want them to move or what they should be moving. And make sure your selection sets don't have anything in them that they shouldn't. So in this case, my Y stretch for the top of this window or this block has all these objects selected, but the middle one only has this middle line selected, and my distance multiplier is set to 0.5. That distance multiplier is a very useful little trick. You can use it on not just XY parameters, but almost all the parameters, probably at least half of them. You can make some nifty stuff with that little feature. Okay, so now what I'm going to do, I'll probably speed the video up for this depending on how long it takes me, but I'm going to make a parameter. I'm going to set this to 4 grips, and there's a reason you can only do 2 grips or 4 grips and not 3, because once you add a grip, you have to put in a lot of work to make it stretch in every direction, and if you'll have to modify these distance multipliers once you add multiple stretches to each direction. So I'll show you what I mean in just a minute here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is add 2 more stretch actions. Add my objects to it. Okay, so now when I test this, we'll see a new problem appear. Now it's double scaling essentially, right? And of course this doesn't work yet, but we'll set that up in a little bit. So once you add additional stretch actions, you actually have to take these and half them, because you have two stretch actions pulling in one direction at the same time. So you can see why there isn't three grips. That would become really, really confusing. It'd create a really erratic results, I guess. So I'm going to test the block again. So this block might not work right until I set up all four of those. Okay, that works right now. So if I stretch it to the right, it's working correctly, but until I set up all four of those corners, 4 stretch actions per corner, which is quite a lot of work, as you probably guessed, then it'll start functioning correctly. So I'm going to do that now. I might make a mistake, so I'll have to do some bug testing on my block, but depending how long it drags out, I'll probably speed the video up while I'm doing this. Okay, I'm back. And that process went a lot smoother than usual, because what happens is that usually one of my actions, maybe I've grabbed something I didn't intend to. One of my distance types is set wrong, or one of my distance multipliers isn't set right. And the only thing I had to, while I was building this block, the only thing I had to go back and fix was I had to add 2 more stretch actions, because I forgot to add the Y stretch actions for this this node, or this grip right here. So if your block doesn't work right off the bat, you'll have to go back and do some bug testing. Don't be discouraged. It's very, very hard to set these up. Okay, we're on to the last part of this tutorial. So I'm going to take all this geometry I've already created and make that a block. Okay, so with this hatch, it's just a gradient, and I've picked 2 true colors for each color of the gradient. Now the white is actually color 255, 255, 255. If I make it color 7, the index color 7, it'll just print black. That's not quite what we want. If I use the true color value, that's the color it'll actually print as. So it ends up being a gradient of this light blue color, and it basically fades out to the paper color. So I have these little window streak marks that I've made, and the shadow down here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to move that shadow. I'm going to draw a polyline. I'm just going to make a theoretical shape of a shadow that we might see from the windowsill. I'm just going to stretch it to the end here. I'll just make another piece, that polyline, so I can join it and close it. I'll make sure it's closed, and it is. So this hatch, it can actually be any color. I've just made it transparent, 85% transparency. So when this prints, it'll look like, give me a shadow effect. And I almost accidentally deleted my boundary. So when I stretch this window, I want the hatch, as you saw, to stretch with it. So the hatch needs to have a boundary. If I copy this hatch out of that boundary, it's not going to associate with anything. I'm not going to be able to stretch it. Or if I break this boundary, I'm going to have issues as well. So there's a few things I could do. I could make this polyline the same color and same transparency as the hatch, but that's not going to look quite right. So if you ever use the transparent polyline, you'll notice that the nodes or the vertexes, the line, it essentially looks like two lines overlapping. There'll be little dots appearing. So I'm going to use a command called bconstruction. And all this does is convert the line work to something that won't appear in the actual drawing. This is a great way if you have a hatch and for some reason you don't want the boundary to show, use the bconstruction command, and that way your hatch is going to be enclosed, but you won't see the enclosing polyline when you print, or even in model space or paper space when you're working in your drawing. So when I hatch this or any object that I'm going to stretch with an action, I need to select the object. I can't just make a disassociated hatch. Your hatch has to be associated with the object. So I'm going to go into hatch options here. Associative, this is the option you want checked. Once you check this, it changes a variable. Every hatch you create will be associative if it's attached to a closed boundary. So I'm just going to hatch these. And to change the pattern, I do it in the ribbon. I think there... I don't think you can do it from using the predefined hatches. No. No, so the only way I actually know how to make a gradient hatch is by using the ribbon. So anyways, when you make it, make sure it's on the layer that you want. I should be in my window pane layer, or I should have the hatch in my window pane layer. So I'm gonna choose the color, more colors. I'm gonna go to true color and pick a nice blue for one part of the gradient. Oops, I gotta change that to gradient. The second color I'm going to, I can see it changed the color on me. I gotta go all the way to 255. It's easier just to type it in. And this, I want to change that. If you use these index colors, it looks good in model space. It looks good in your drawing, but when you print, it's going to print black. So you got to go to more colors, true color, and then you can pick your pick whatever shade of blue looks best. You can change the angle of it, of course. I'm going to put it at 45 degrees. If I wanted that, let's see, if I turned it to 315, I can have that fade showing up from a different direction. So instead of redrawing that, I'll just copy it to each window, and I think that looks just fine. Now I could only I could make one window pane, and then I could put some sort of a mask or blackout here, just so I'd have like a, I'll show you what I mean really quickly, just one gradient for the whole window, not just one for each individual pane. Sort of like that. But you either need to use a mask or have a special layer that would print as a color 255, 255, 255. So anyways, I'm going to stick this guy in the middle. Copy him to each. Now this is a horrible color. It's going to wreck your eyes if you drew like that. So I'm going to change that to a different different color, something that's there. That's a lot more contrast there, so our eyes are saved for the time being at least. Okay, so I'll just add a base point. It's just a good practice, but you don't, for this particular version, you don't need to. Add my XY parameter. I want to add the grip where the actual window dimension would end. Not the rough opening per se, but the nominal window size. I don't want to put my grip on the trim, because that doesn't really dictate the actual size of the window. It would be this point right here. And maybe your rough opening would be 3/4 to 1 inch past that in each X and Y direction. Okay, so let's take that grip and turn it down to 1. Now with this block having these symbols in each pane, you can put 4 grips on. But remember, you're going to have to make an extra action for each one of these window panes. This gets ends up being a lot of work, as you're going to see. But I'm gonna do the first one, and then I'm gonna skip ahead in the video, so you don't have to watch me go through that process, because that can be quite arduous to perform and arduous to watch, I imagine, as well. Okay, so I'm going to do the stretch action again. You've already seen it, but the more you see it, the more likely you're able to memorize it better. I'm going to do 2 stretches at a time. That seems to work best. Or how about in this case, I'm actually going to do 3 at a time. Oops. Now note that when I stretch these, in this case I don't need to select the hatches, because the boundary will dictate where the hatch ends up. Sometimes the hatch won't look right. Try hitting refresh in your screen when you manipulate these actions, and it should fix itself. The issue is that, and you saw me select the hatch on this action, the issue with grabbing the hatch is that if you actually move the hatch itself using this point, it'll break it out of its boundary, and then it'll goof up your block. But if you just manipulate the boundary, the hatch will follow that boundary all the time. Almost all the time. There's exceptions to that, but if you're not using constraints, it's going to follow the boundary. So sometimes not selecting the hatch will make this more stable than selecting it. Okay, so this one, when I stretch these guys, I gotta pick, I guess I gotta stretch them. I gotta change this distance multiplier to 0.75. This one gets changed to 0.5. And you might have noticed I forgot to change my distance types. So all these gotta be X distance. Actually got to add one more stretch. Oops. Okay, change that one to X distance and 0.25. So now that we have different multipliers, you can see why it would be so hard to add 4 grips, because now we'd have to chop all those in half. If we added extra grips, that would be really, it's possible, it's totally possible, but it'd take a lot of time. Okay, so this is actually working. Oh yeah, I only installed that one that one action. So I'm gonna put that vertical action into this block and skip ahead to that afterwards, and I'll show you what this block looks like as it would if we printed it. Okay, so it looks like we're all finished. So a couple things I did, I'll just go back into the block editor and show you quick before I wrap this video up. So one thing, when I made, let's see, when I made this stretch action, or this one, I accidentally selected some stuff I shouldn't, and actually I still have something selected that I shouldn't. So I'm going to go to Action Selection Set, Modify Selection Set, just click R for Remove. Oops, I gotta make the crossing polygon first. R for remove, and this thing doesn't need to be a part of this selection set. When you make these selection sets, only select the stuff that you actually need to be part of the selection set. So I'm actually going to, in this case, this one right here, I only need these 4 rectangles, not the hatch, not any of these polylines that make up my exterior trim. Just these 4 rectangles. The other thing I did is I made sure my hatches weren't part of any of my selection sets. That's because when I use the stretch action on these polylines that are rectangles, the hatch is going to follow it. But if you actually stretch the hatch, depending on the situation, you might actually, like that for instance, I'll actually pull the hatch out of its boundary. So sometimes you can get away with having the hatch in your selection set. Like for example, if I just stretch this right here, it's going to be fine. But depending how you stretch, where your stretch action, where your crossing polygon is, you might actually pull those hatches right out of their boundary, and that's what would mess up the block. The last thing I'll touch on is these window pane symbols. I show you, I'll close this, disregard the changes. As this block gets bigger, you'll notice that these symbols don't really look too good anymore. So one of my other videos, I show you how to address that. There's, I'm sure there's a way to scale them as you stretch this, but that would be a lot of work and a lot of brain power to create that, right? So I don't quite think that's suitable for a tutorial that I'm trying to keep to under 20 minutes. So anyways, that's all my tips and tricks for blocks. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll make a preview right on the right side here to see what this will give you an idea of what this would print like. Last thing I'll touch on, the shadows again. Quite honestly, with all the 3D software out there and live dynamic shadows, I don't really know if this is really worth doing, adding the shadow effect here, but gave me an excuse to show you those using that construction geometry within the block, right? And maybe a quick trick if you need a really quick visual presentation of something. But yeah, the new 3D software available, Revit of course, SketchUp, I've been getting it to Rhino. That works way better for creating live shadows. They look 100 times better than what you can do in AutoCAD in a 2D drawing. It's really a bit of a boutique art form, so to speak. Okay, so that's the end of the video. Thanks a lot for watching.